Well, what a night. Joining us now is the chairman of the Conservative Party, Oliver Dowden. Very good morning to
Hello,
you,
good
Mr.
morning.
Dowden. Let's start by talking about last night, if we may. An absolute drubbing, wasn't it? What went wrong?
Well, voters in North Shropshire were fed up and they gave us a kicking. And I think they wanted to send us a message. And I want to say, as chairman of the Conservative Party, we've heard that loud and clear. We need to get on with delivering the job, and that's precisely what we're doing. For example, with the booster programme to deal with its Omicron variant, we've administered over 700,000 vaccines just yesterday. I would, though, say that these are quite unique circumstances, and in a by-election like this, you would expect the opposition party, the Labour Party, to be surging. They were a strong second, and in fact, they're sinking.
But it wasn't normal by-election dynamics, was it? And you talk about special circumstances, but really, you've gifted this to the Lib Dems, and you say that they sent you a message, the voters there. What is the message that you're receiving, and is it an endorsement, do you think, of your leader?
Well, voters are clearly fed up and they want us to get on with the job and focus on the job. And our job as a government, particularly at a time of crisis like this, is to make sure we're focused on the core priorities. Number one is to get on with delivering the booster programme. That's the way we stay open and we maintain normal life during this very difficult period. The Prime Minister's put turbo boosters under that, and we've had over 700,000 boosters administered.
The Prime
Equally,
Minister...
on the economy, we've got some of the lowest unemployment since before the crisis. That's where our focus must be.
But, Mr Dowden, this isn't about the booster jab, is it? This is a referendum on the Prime Minister, effectively. Is he still an electoral asset for the Conservatives?
Yes, I think the Prime Minister is an electoral asset for the Conservative Party, and I'll tell you why. Just take the three really big calls we've faced. Get Brexit done. He's delivered on it. We've delivered the fastest...
Many people would say they're not satisfied.
We've delivered the fastest booster programme in the world twice over, and we've seen the economy through this terrible period with unemployment lower than when we entered. So I think actually on the big calls, the Prime Minister has the vision and the direction to get us through this difficult period.
A lot of the Red Wall Tories, though, are going to be worried, aren't they? And any Tory, indeed, with a slim majority, they're going to be worried about their seats. You've got a problem.
Well, we see results like this mid-term. It's a case, it happens time and time again. You know, between 1989 and 2014, we didn't win a single by-election in government. We lost Brecon and Radnorshire to the Liberal Democrats before the 2019 election. We won it back. If the Liberal Democrats did as well in by-elections, in general elections they do in by-elections, they've been in power for the past 50 years. It is the case that people have sent us a message. We've heard that message, but I wouldn't extrapolate too much through to the general. So
mumblings about no confidence in the Prime Minister. Are conversations being had behind closed doors and letters being written?
Well, I have no idea whether letters are being written, but I have every confidence the Prime Minister has the leadership to see us through this period. And I think he has shown, whether it's in relation to getting Brexit done or this latest record-beating booster campaign, that he's got that drive and determination.
Again, we'll come on to the booster campaign. I know you're clearly very keen to talk about it. More stories, though, today in the day's papers. Your leader himself, the Prime Minister, is accused of attending a party at Number 10 during the first lockdown. Your comments on that, please.
Well, I understand that this was a meeting that took place in the garden. Actually, it was the case at the time. If you're going to have a meeting, you're better off having it outside because of the fresh air and ventilation.
So will questions be asked? Will there be an investigation into that?
Well, I've seen the account given by Downing Street that there was a meeting that took place and it took place outside. I think that was perfectly appropriate and reasonable. There had been a press conference previously, and it was perfectly reasonable to have the meeting afterwards outside. So will Simon Case be looking into the details of that one as well? I don't think there's a need for the Cabinet Secretary to look into this one because the circumstances appear to be pretty clear. CCHQ, we understand again from the papers that police are quizzing two people about that party that took place there with Sean Bailey. Is it right that police are quizzing two people that were there at CCHQ and they're not looking into what happened at the various parties that are being alleged at Number 10? Well, you wouldn't expect me as a Cabinet Minister to comment on the operationally independent Metropolitan Police, but in respect of the completely unauthorised party that took place at Conservative HQ by the London mayoral campaign, it was appalling, it was wrong, It should never have happened, and the people involved have been punished.
OK, let's move on. Another front page that I don't think you'll like the look of. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Terrible pun there. But the idea is that's the direction of travel. Are we looking at more restrictions ahead of Christmas?
Well, these are very difficult times, and we've seen with this surge of Omicron doubling almost every 2 days, we're having to take very difficult decisions. And I think anyone that pretends that this is simple or straightforward is pretending. However, I do think right now we have got the balance right. The key thing is the booster. If you
can I come back to the restrictions,
this is
Mr. Dowden?
This is a very important point, though, about the booster, because it's only if people get that booster that we can continue with the kind of freedoms that we have now. It gives you 75% protection against it, probably more against hospitalisation. That is the plank on which we're building our strategy.
Wales is bringing in new restrictions. Scotland has gone further. Why are we always a step behind? And even the Queen has cancelled her Christmas parties. Shouldn't the messaging be clearer?
Well, the message is clear that people need to be sensible and cautious. But because of the vaccine, because of the booster, we are confident that we can have restrictions as they stand at the moment, alongside the further mask wearing and so on. It's because of the strength of that booster, and that's why it's essential that we keep getting that booster into people's arms. And we've had record success with that yesterday, with over 700,000 administered. I think that is the correct and balanced approach.
All right, less than what is targeted, though, at 1 million. You are asking people to choose effectively, though, aren't you, between the advice being given by the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, and the government. Very mixed messaging there, but it appears as though people's trust is going with the medical professionals. We've seen the cancellations, we've seen a real drop-off in people using public transport. They're not trusting the government on this.
Well, Chris Whitty, with whom you might imagine I speak frequently, Prime Minister, Cabinet and I are all in agreement, and the single best thing we can do in this situation is to get the booster rolled out as rapidly as possible. We made that big call back in the summer to buy the Pfizer and Moderna, another big call by the Prime Minister. That is very effective against this new Omicron variant. We're saying to everyone, get your booster. If you get your booster, we can build back up that wall of defence and continue with life as it was before.
Just one last question about Chris Whitty. Reports in the papers that he's under fire from Tory MPs for effectively freelancing and advising people in a way that doesn't accord with what the government is saying. Is your party at war with the CMO?
Well, I have a great deal of respect for Chris Whitty, and I think we should respect his integrity and independence as an advisor. Of course, advisors advise and ministers decide and are accountable for the strategy off the back of that. And I know that these are difficult times and people have
well, do you think
a
went too
range
far?
of...
Were you personally disappointed with his intervention at the press conference?
I think it's perfectly appropriate for Chris Whitty to advise the government, which is exactly what he has done, but is equally perfectly appropriate for the government to make decisions off the back of that. And that's what we've done with this strategy, the core part of which is the booster campaign. I'm sorry to keep on talking about it, but it is so essential that people get that booster.
One other thing I want to talk to you about before we get on to boosters, a business community crying out for support. The Chancellor was swanning around in California. What is going on? Is there any more support for businesses?
Well, the Chancellor certainly wasn't swanning around. The Chancellor was out in the United States representing the United Kingdom, meeting with leading businesses in the United States. He's also been in constant contact, for example, with the hospitality industry and the Prime Minister. We have demonstrated time and time again that we will stand behind business when they need that support. For example, when I was Culture Secretary, I remember when lockdown started, I was warned that we could lose 1/3 of football clubs, 2/3 of our cultural institutions. Thanks to the record Cultural Recovery Fund, £2 billion, we've preserved almost all of them. There's money there. There's money in relation to business rate relief.
I know you say that
he's...
Forgive me for interrupting, Mr Dowden. I know you say he's meeting with businesses in America. It's very important. Businesses say that they're going to go to the wall over Christmas here. They say, where is he? He should be meeting with us. He didn't show up to a round table yesterday. He also says that existing support is enough, but the businesses say they won't survive through Christmas. So what's going to happen? Is there any hope of more support for them?
Well, the Chancellor is returning to the United Kingdom today, I understand. If you look at the kind of support that's available, take the business rate relief through to spring, that will mean that businesses are paying a quarter of the business rates they would normally pay for. That's why we've cut VAT and kept VAT cut at 12.5%. There's also over £250 million still with local authorities that could go to support businesses, and I know that the Chancellor is working with them to get that money out. So we have proven that we'll put the resources in and we will support those businesses, and I know the Chancellor's committed to doing that.
All right, but no new money as far as you know at the moment as you sit here?
We have already put support in place. Of course, we watch this hour by hour, day by day, and I know the Chancellor is very closely engaged, but at the moment we have appropriate supports in place.
All right, Oliver Dowden, thank you very much for coming in to see us at Sky News. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas to you too.
Well, we will be discussing the result from that by-election in North Shropshire with the Conservative MP Sir Roger Gale and Boris Johnson's former Communications Director, Will Walden. We'll be joined by the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, as Wales plans new lockdown rules after Christmas. And for some more reaction on last night's by-election, we'll talk to the Shadow Business Minister, Jonathan Reynolds. That's just after 8 o'clock. Now, 4 children, all believed to be related, have died in a house fire in South London. Firefighters wearing breathing apparatus managed to remove the youngsters from the property in Sutton and give them CPR, but were unable to revive them. A warning, our report now from Ivor Bennett does feature some flashing images.
Even in the dark, the charred front of the house could be seen from beyond the police cordon as firefighters assessed the damage of a fire that claimed the lives of 4 young children, all believed to be related. There are many here who need comfort. Ellie O'Neill lives nearby and rushed home when she heard what happened.
Devastated for them kids, them poor children and the poor families, the poor mum, dad, what they're going to be going through. It's terrible.
8 fire engines and 60 firefighters responded to the call just before 7 p.m. in Sutton, South London. The children were given immediate CPR after being recovered from the house before they were taken to hospital, where they were pronounced dead. The London Fire Brigade said its staff here will be offered counselling as a priority. The cause of the fire is still unknown and is now under investigation. The police say no arrests have been made and that the family of the children have been informed and will be given specialist support. In a statement, Superintendent Rob Shepherd said, "The thoughts of everyone at the South Area Command Unit are with the family and friends of these 4 young children who have suffered such a devastating and tragic loss tonight. I know these sentiments will be shared by the local community, Sutton and London as a whole." It took firefighters an hour and a half to get the flames under control. The pain and loss here will last for a great deal longer. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Sutton.
Now, all nightclubs will close in Wales. That is part of new lockdown restrictions that are coming into force after Christmas. Wales has announced it is toughening up its COVID measures after Boxing Day to try to tackle the spread of the Omicron variant. Well, from the 27th of December, 2-metre social distancing will become a legal requirement in shops and businesses. One-way systems and physical barriers to keep people apart will also return, and businesses will be required to let staff work from home wherever possible. And nightclubs will be forced to close as well. Now, it will be jabs around the clock this weekend as more 24-hour vaccine centres open across the country. Well, Sadia Chowdhury is at one now in Crawley. Morning to you, Sadia. A massive operation being undertaken there.
Good morning, Sam. Yes, in just under an hour, these doors will open and they will remain open because this is one of the first 24-hour vaccination sites in the country. It is the first in the southeast, and that means people can come, as you say, around the clock to get their vaccinations. And the target here is to vaccinate 1,000 people a day. And you don't expect to see long queues here because most of those appointments are appointments only. But they have said to me that if they see that there is a gap coming up, that it might be quiet or there are some cancellations, vaccinations, then they'll get on social media, invite people in the local area to come and do a walk-in. But, you know, there is a big car park here, so people can wait in their cars before, but also after the jab. We know that 15-minute rule has gone, but if anyone is of any concern, they can wait in their cars. And they're doing this in a dedicated vaccination site that they built specifically for the vaccine programme. And since last year, they've vaccinated, this GP Alliance has vaccinated around 90,000 people, but that looks to be stepped up very sharply now with this 24-hour programme starting from today.
Yeah, busy day ahead, Sadia. Thank you very much. Well, let's look into some more detail now at the latest daily COVID figures for the UK. Well, there have been 88,376 new cases of COVID-19 recorded in the last 24 hours. That is the highest number of the pandemic so far, and almost 10,000 more than yesterday. Another 146 deaths have been reported within 28 days of a positive test. Well, that brings the total number of deaths in the UK to 146,937. Well, hearing there about the vaccine programme, 28,067 people received their first dose of a vaccine, 38,794 have had their second, and the total number of people to have received their second dose is now approaching 47 million. Well, and another new record, 745,183 people received their booster or third vaccine in the past 24 hours. That brings the total to more than 25.4 million people. Well, to Japan now, where at least 27 people are reported to have died in a suspected arson attack on a psychiatric clinic in the Japanese city of Osaka. Well, joining me now is our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire. This is a terrible tragedy. Tom, what's happened?
Morning, Samia. This is a horrifying fire that started around 10 a.m. just after this psychiatric clinic had opened its doors in a shopping district in Osaka, which is Japan's second biggest city. People there reported smoke billowing out the windows, so a very fierce fire. You can see on the screen right now what's happened after it, but people saying they saw a woman at the windows calling for help. That help did come. 70 fire engines were at the scene, and the fire was extinguished relatively quickly in around 20 minutes or so, but still 27 people are believed to be feared dead. The reason we're saying feared dead is because in Japan you need a doctor to certify a death, and that hasn't happened yet in those cases. Firefighters said 27 people were in cardiac arrest at the scene, so the fear is that that death toll will be confirmed. 4 people have been confirmed dead according to the national broadcaster in Japan. The focus now on what started that fire, and police saying they are investigating the possibility of arson. Local media reports suggesting that an elderly man was seen walking into the building, supposedly a patient carrying a bag full of flammable liquid that was leaking. Those are unconfirmed as yet, but will bring back memories of that horrible 2019 arson attack when more than 30 people were killed at an animation studio. That is unconfirmed right now. Police working at the scene trying to understand what happened here, as well as people in hospitals working to see whether that death toll will sadly rise.
OK, Tom, thank you. Well, also making the news this morning, lawyers for Ghislaine Maxwell have tried to undermine the credibility of her female accusers during her sex trafficking trial in New York. The British socialite has pleaded not guilty to recruiting and grooming young girls for the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. A court in the United States has issued a search warrant for Alec Baldwin's phone after the fatal shooting of the cinematographer Halyna Hutchins on the set of the film Rust. Halyna Hutchins was killed in October when a gun that the actor was holding during filming was fired. Now, Sky News understands the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has told staff he is deeply unhappy about a party that was held at his department during last year's lockdown. The Cabinet Secretary has now started an investigation into that, and the department has apologised and insists it was a low-key gathering. Now, officials say the deaths of 10 people in a crowd surge at a music festival in Houston last month were accidental. Investigators in Texas say that their findings were delayed due to further tests being carried out on the victims. Let's have a check-in with the weather now.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it's a very quiet picture in the days ahead, with high pressure dominating, but fog over eastern areas will be dense at times and slow to clear, bringing possible travel disruption. This morning, the fog lies over eastern counties from Yorkshire to East Anglia. Visibility is less than 50 metres in places, and it'll be slow to lift through the day, lingering throughout for some. Fog-bound areas will see daytime temperatures of around 3 or 4 degrees.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the voters gave us a kicking. Those were the words of the Conservative Party chairman, Oliver Dowden, this morning after the Liberal Democrats took a shock victory in the North Shropshire by-election. They overturned a majority of nearly 23,000 in a result which adds to the turmoil surrounding the Prime Minister. Well, a short time ago, Mr Dowden admitted it was a bad result for the Conservatives.
Voters in North Shropshire were fed up and they gave us a kicking. And I think they wanted to send us a message. And I want to say, as chairman of the Conservative Party, we've heard that loud and clear. We need to get on with delivering the job, and that's precisely what we're doing.
Well, we can get more now on that by-election result from North Shropshire. After a triumphant night, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, joins me this morning. What a night for the Lib Dems.
I think this is a watershed moment in British politics. It was such a spectacular result. I'm obviously really delighted for Helen Morgan, our new Liberal Democrat MP for North Shropshire. But I'm so proud of our party and our campaigners. I think we brought some new hope to the whole nation. And I think we've shown that we can beat the Conservatives anywhere. We've beaten the Conservatives in 2 of their safest seats this year. Early this year in darkest blue Buckinghamshire, with Chesham and Amersham, and now in North Shropshire. So I think people will be encouraged that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives can be held to account, and Liberal Democrats can do that.
Well, the party is over seemed to be a pretty effective slogan for you. What kind of things were you hearing on the doorstep, and when did you get the sense that this could go your way?
Well, I travelled 5 times to North Shropshire, had 10 days campaigning there. So I talked to a lot of voters. And actually, to start, they were really talking about issues like the health service, long waiting times for ambulances, difficulties to see their GPs, the rising cost of living. And they felt the Conservatives were taking them for granted, had taken them for granted for many years. And these are people who've played by the rules, who've always voted Conservative, and now they're turning to the Liberal Democrats. And I think those local issues must be remembered. Of course, there were national issues, and I'm not surprised Boris Johnson, after his shocking Peppa Pig speech and all this Partygate, where they've broken the rules that they've told us to follow, I'm not surprised that he's now losing the support of lifelong Conservatives. And many of them said to me, they don't just...
Sorry to interrupt you there, Mr Davies. Just saying the party chairman was saying, yes, the voters did give us a kicking, but we've full confidence in Boris Johnson, Prime Minister. And how long do you think that is going to remain the status quo?
Well, I think the Conservative chairman should listen a bit more closely to the people of North Shropshire. They were telling me that they don't think Boris Johnson is a decent person, not a decent person to lead our country. And frankly, I think the people of North Shropshire have sent in a letter of no confidence in Boris Johnson to the Conservative 1922 committee. I think Conservative MPs will be very alarmed by this result because these were lifelong Conservatives dismayed at Boris Johnson's lack of decency, saying they don't like him, they don't want him. And so, I felt for a long time, I felt that he's not fit to lead our country. And I think more and more people now who used to trust Boris Johnson no longer do.
Very good result for you in this particular constituency, Mr Davey, but you still have relatively few MPs. Is this an inflection point, do you think, for the Liberal Democrats after the coalition which really drastically damaged your electoral prospects?
I think this is a historic moment for the Liberal Democrats. Let's remember we won a major by-election victory earlier this year in Cheshire and Amersham in blue Buckinghamshire, where we took the first brick out of the Conservative blue wall. Since then, we've been selecting amazing candidates in seats that we're going to be targeting at the next general election, seats from Guildford to Eastbourne, from Cheltenham to Wimbledon. And now we won another seat in a former Conservative heartland. And now we're going to go on to the local elections. So I think the Liberal Democrats are on a roll now. I think people like what we say about a fairer deal for people over the health service, over the schools, over the cost of living, and people responding very positively to our message.
Okay.
They
All
think
right.
that we're interested in them and the Tories are out of touch.
All right. I just want to say, Mr. David, I don't know if it's your lighting, but I know you've got COVID. You don't look very well. How are you feeling?
Not great, I'll be honest. I'm under the weather, but the sun is shining on the Liberal Democrats.
That's a dreadful note on which to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed for speaking to us this morning, Ed Daly. Thank you. Well, we can get reaction now from the Conservative Member of Parliament for North Thanet, Sir Roger Gale. Good morning to you, Sir Roger. Did you think this was possible, what we saw in North Shropshire?
Yes, I thought it was highly likely that this would happen. I don't want to detract from Helen Morgan's very considerable victory, but this wasn't a vote for the Liberal Democrats. This was effectively a referendum on the performance coming out of Downing Street at the moment.
It's been a terrible few weeks, hasn't it, for the Prime Minister? Where does this leave his authority in the party, do you think?
He has got the good fortune of having the House in recess. The House has got time to think about this, and the party's got time to think about this. He's got about 3 weeks now to regroup, and he's going to have to do that very fast indeed. We've had 2 strikes. First of all, the Conservative Party in the House of Commons earlier this week. Now this result. 1 more strike, and I think he's out.
Really? Those letters are going in, are they, to the 1922 committee?
I would not be a bit surprised if people didn't start to write some of those letters. We've got the Southend by-election coming up. Now, that's going to be an odd situation because the Liberal Party and the Labour Party have, because of the circumstances of David Amos's death, agreed not to fight it. But it will be fought. And it's quite possible, I think, that if we're not careful, there might be a protest vote there as well. This is not a happy time for the Prime Minister, I'm afraid.
How widely are those conversations about replacing him as leader, how widely are those conversations taking place?
I'm speaking for myself and not for the Conservative Party. I must make that absolutely plain. I have written to Sir Graham Brady, but I did that after the Barnard Castle business, because I felt then that there was a lack of the right kind of leadership. And I made that view known, and I've been making it known since. So a lot of people will say, well, that's just Roger Gale saying what Roger Gale says. I can't tell you what the rest of the party are saying, but I have an idea that there will be a lot of people who are very concerned this morning.
There are further accusations in the newspapers this morning about Downing Street parties, including one which claims that the Prime Minister himself was attending during the first lockdown. You said before that this could be a resignation matter, and these stories keep coming.
I've said, and I mean, that if the Prime Minister is shown to have deliberately misled the House, and I mean deliberately misled the House from the dispatch box, then in my view, that is a resignation issue. We have to see what the Cabinet Secretary says. The other thing I would say is that nobody particularly wants a leadership election in the middle of a pandemic. Now is not the best time. There's never a good time, but now is not the best time to embark upon that road. So the Prime Minister has got an opportunity to regroup, get his act together, and give us the kind of government that I think most of us thought was going to be on the cards.
Do you think he's got it in him?
He's a man of great ability. If he focuses his mind on what is really necessary, if he focuses his mind on what not only the Conservative Party, but the people of this country want, and starts to deliver in a big way, and he's delivered some things that are good, if he starts to deliver in a big way, then he might survive this. But it is touch and go.
Sir Roger Gale, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you for your time on Sky News. Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell is in Oswestry for us there. Shockwaves of this going out far and wide, and many questions being raised, Rob, about the Prime Minister's hold on his party.
Yeah, and an indication there, Sam, from Sir Roger Gale of the impact that this by-election result may well have on internal politics in the Conservative Party in Westminster. Sir Roger Gale, an MP for almost 40 years, so someone who I think is more freely able to speak his mind and be honest publicly than some MPs may be willing to be. Yes, he has been at the critical end previously about Boris Johnson, but I think very significant that Roger Gale is saying he wouldn't be surprised if letters are going in, that there was one strike with that Commons defeat, that Commons rebellion against Boris Johnson earlier this week on COVID restrictions, that this by-election is the second and a third strike, and he will be out, and essentially putting Boris Johnson on notice, saying that he now has the Christmas break to go away, to think about what's happened, and to come back and regroup, essentially. I think Sir Roger Gale is correct when he says that this by-election was almost more of a referendum on what's going on in government, as much as Sir Ed Davey talks about this as a watershed moment for the Lib Dems and talks about local issues, which of course always play a part in by-elections. The Lib Dems focused heavily on the sleaze row around Owen Paterson. They focused heavily on the allegations around Christmas parties as well. So I think it is worth thinking about this result in that context rather than necessarily extrapolating it out to a general election. In terms of what the Conservative Party centrally is saying today, well, actually, I thought Oliver Dowden was quite frank, saying that they did take a kicking here, that voters are fed up and that they are listening to that loud and clear. I guess the question is that message getting through to Boris Johnson? Is he able to change, to grip some of the problems facing his government and stop seemingly lurching from crisis to crisis? And what can he do to make that happen in the coming weeks and months?
All right, Rob, thank you very much. Well, Boris Johnson's communications director at City Hall, he's now senior counsel at Edelman, Will Walden, joins me now. A very good morning to you, Mr. Walden. Questions being raised about whether or not the message of this by-election result is going to get through to Boris Johnson. You know the man. Will the message be getting through?
Morning, Sam. Look, there's no getting away from this. This is a thumping at the time when the Prime Minister's authority is already under threat. And I think it's very difficult to do what they always do, which is to brush this off as a typical by-election midterm blip. And I suspect the PM this morning is privately kicking himself. It's a largely self-inflicted wound. It's a by-election that should never have happened. And it comes on the back of some very damaging headlines. And if I was a Tory activist or a Tory MP this morning, yeah, I'd be concerned. But more importantly, if I was the Prime Minister this morning, I'd be concerned. The result here should never have been in doubt. This is a Tory seat. It's been a Tory seat for nearly 200 years. And I think there's a clear message here from the Tory heartland in Shropshire. It's get your act together. To your point about, whether he can sort this out, I think the first thing I would be saying to him if he asked, if I was still advising him, would be, take a break. I think, he's had some huge responsibilities over the last couple of years. I think he needs to recharge. He needs to reassess his priorities and think about what really matters. Look, Boris Johnson is not a man who changes easily. But I think that clearly this is a wake-up call and a very present wake-up call. And he will need to think about the tone that he sets in Downing Street and the way that he runs his government. And government more generally will have to think about what the priorities are and how they're going to act upon them. Because, clearly there is no getting away from the fact that this is a really big problem for the Prime Minister.
We are understanding that the Prime Minister is going to give a speech at the start of January. He's going to seek to really be wiping the slate clean of all of the torrid few weeks that he's had in the run-up to Christmas. The last time he gave a big speech, though, it didn't go so well. How is he going to be preparing for this?
Well, I think you're probably referring to the Peppa Pig moment. None of that came as any surprise to me. That's Boris all over. I think it's not so much how is he going to be preparing for it. It is what is the tone that he is going to set. And I think, if I had any advice for him this morning, it would be he may have to break the habit of a lifetime and think that in future he's going to have to act with a little bit more humble pie and probably stop acting as if he's constantly at war. I think it's extraordinary for a government that has an 80-seat majority that they constantly look like they're firefighting and at war. And I think that the part of that is about thinking about apologies in the appropriate moment. So, for example, on the Christmas party gate, I would have thought they probably would have been better, rather than doubling down, which is a Boris Johnson trait. There's no surprise in that. Thinking about that and thinking, maybe we need to get out ahead of this. Maybe we need to stand up and just say, look, mistakes were made. I don't know, honest mistakes were made. Mistakes were made. It's bad. We apologise. We've disciplined those responsible. And I think the problem is they're now having an inquiry led by Simon Case, which is probably going to do just that. The best thing to do would have been to think, we're not going to be able to ride this through. Let's get in front of it. Let's apologise for it, and let's move on. And I think as to the broader point, I go back to the point that the Prime Minister sets the tone. He always sets the tone, and I think he's going to have to think about the tone that he sets in terms of his government and the way that things operate in Downing Street. There's a lot of criticism about, he's got the wrong advice and the wrong advisors. I think ultimately, this is a government-wide problem, but it's also a Boris problem. And I think, knowing Boris, he'll know that and he'll be reflecting on that. And he should take Christmas to take a break, spend time with his new baby and come back reset in the new year.
All right, Will Baldwin, good to get your perspective this morning on Sky News. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Does anyone know which particular parts of your body can be damaged by air pollution?
Friday morning will be mostly dry, mild and cloudy, but there'll be some dense fog around, mainly across eastern England from Yorkshire to East Anglia. Travel disruption is possible. Scotland and areas northwest of high ground will have the best of the sunshine. It'll be a touch cooler than recently, but very mild on the Scottish hills. The afternoon will be similar, with fog lingering all day in parts of the east. Despite the settled conditions, air pollution levels will stay low, measuring between 1 and 3 on the daily air quality index.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, all nightclubs will close in Wales. That's as part of new lockdown restrictions that are coming into force after Christmas. Well, here to tell us more about the new rules is the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford. Good morning to you, Mr Drakeford. What is the current situation of the spread of Omicron in Wales?
Well, Wales is in the calm before the storm. This week, the Delta variant continues to be the dominant variant in Wales. Numbers are stable. Hospital numbers slowly coming down. But we know that the Omicron wave is brewing and that when it arrives in Wales, it will rise very swiftly and very steeply. And so we're having to prepare for that as well.
So talk us through, Mr Drakeford, if you would, these tighter measures.
Well, before Christmas, we will be issuing new strong guidance to people in Wales as to how they can keep themselves and others safe in the run-up to Christmas. Very simple things like, if you are going out to a gathering of any sort, make sure you've taken a lateral flow test. Flow before you go, as we tell people in Wales. Think about who you're meeting. Are you going to be meeting somebody who is vulnerable because of their own health? And make that part of your plan. Could you meet outdoors instead of indoors? Are you doing all those simple things, the mask wearing, the hand washing, the simple things we've learned to do that help to keep one another safe? Provided we all do that, we think we can get a run through to Christmas where people can enjoy Christmas, but stay safe at Christmas as well. Immediately after the Christmas...
Nightclubs to close from the 27th, so viruses don't wait for Christmas. Why not sooner?
Because, as I say, in the days ahead, up to Christmas, the Delta variant will be the dominant one here in Wales, and the safeguards we have in place, the COVID pass you have to use to go to a nightclub, for example, we think that that will be sufficient to keep Wales safe. But because we know that the Omicron variant is here already and is guaranteed to grow, we need to take action after the Christmas break. So nightclubs will not reopen. When shops reopen, then the rules will be stricter. Controls on the number of people entering shops, one-way systems, organised queuing at checkouts and so on. When offices reopen, the 2-metre rule will be back as part of the reasonable measures that have to be taken in Wales. All of those things designed to shore up our defences against the wave that we know is coming our way.
One of the problems that Wales had in previous lockdowns is that you would impose restrictions and people would just go across the border. So what's to stop people doing their nightclubbing, their post-Christmas nightclubbing over in England?
Well, you're right that the border is very porous and people who live across the border can make those choices. It's a very small fraction of the Welsh population that is in that position and makes those decisions. We're seeing already, not just in Wales, but across the United Kingdom, people making decisions in their own lives to keep themselves safe. And that's what we will be appealing to people in Wales to do. There is a big wave coming our way, and unless we do the sensible things, lives that otherwise could be saved will be lost. Our health service will face an enormous challenge. We can all do things to help, and that's what people in Wales, I know, will want to do.
I know you're urging people in Wales to have a smaller Christmas, to restrict the number of people that they're mixing with. At the national level, do you think that that message is coming across clearly from Prime Minister Boris Johnson about what he expects the people to do?
Well, the UK government is now embarked on a major advertising campaign, and their advertising campaign is in line with our message to people in Wales that a smaller Christmas is a safer Christmas this year. We know that that takes place against a very difficult backdrop because of everything that has gone on inside Downing Street and inside the UK government. Despite all that, I hope that people across the United Kingdom will hear that message. We are all of us facing a very difficult January. We can all help to deal with that. And I hope that the messages that all governments across the United Kingdom are giving will be listened to and will be acted upon.
What do you make of the Chief Medical Officer coming under fire, according to reports in papers, by many Tory MPs for freelancing and for frightening people, for just suggesting that they should prioritise their social interactions? Is that responsible?
It's not responsible at all. I think it is disgraceful that the Chief Medical Officer of England should come under attack in that way. The Chief Medical Officer is giving the best advice he can from his depth of clinical knowledge and understanding. It is very good advice indeed, and I think it is disgraceful that he should be attacked and his message undermined by people who have nothing like the grasp that he has of the Omicron variant and its likely effect in the United Kingdom. I think those people should think very carefully about a period of silence on their part
First
being
Minister
welcome.
of Wales, Mark Drakeford, really good to talk